October 1943. The Liri Valley, southern Italy. Altitude 400 feet above the vine-choked slopes. The air is thick with the smell of wet earth, gunpowder, and an acute, visceral dread. For the Allied tank crews pushing north, Italy was a grueling lesson in the limitations of their primary weapon, the M4 Sherman tank. They nicknamed it the Ronson because it lit up on the first strike. Across the valley, nestled within fortified defensive lines, the German tankers felt little fear. They knew the M4. They respected its numbers, but they scorned its firepower. The standard Sherman, armed with the 75mm M13 gun, was a weapon of maneuver and infantry support. Its high-explosive HE shells were excellent for clearing entrenched troops, but in the brutal, close-quarters slugfest of tank-on-tank combat, especially against the formidable German heavyweights, it was anemic. The German armored divisions and the forces holding the Gustav Line relied on machines of true terror. The Tiger I and the Panther, with their thick, sloped armor and devastating high-velocity 75mm and 75mm K-42 guns, could dispatch a Sherman from distances where the American tank couldn't even dent their paint. This was the stark, deadly arithmetic of the battlefield. The Allied tankers were required to close to suicidal range, often less than 100 yards, and aim for specific weak points like the drive sprocket or the rear turret just to have a chance. The Germans, however, could stand back, relax and pick their targets with clinical impunity. What the German High Command didn't understand was that a tiny, almost secret program, born out of desperation and brilliant physics, was about to fundamentally alter that equation. The historical record speaks of the German confidence. Generaloberst Friedrich von Senger und Etterlin, facing the onslaught in Italy, reported back to Berlin that the M4 was a good, reliable tank, but fundamentally lacked the punch to threaten his lines, especially compared to the threat of the British heavy guns. The very sight of the Sherman's smallish 75mm muzzle brought a wry smile to the faces of veteran German tank commanders. The issue was velocity. The standard M72 armor-piercing AP shell from the 75mm M3 gun left the barrel at a modest 2,030 feet per second. This was fast enough for most light and medium armor, but it simply lacked the kinetic energy needed to defeat the thick, hardened steel of the Panther's glacis plate, which often exceeded 100 millimeters of effective thickness. Meanwhile, the Allies had to flood the theater with these tanks. By 1943, the sheer industrial scale of American manufacturing was staggering. While Germany was struggling to produce its heavy tanks, the US was rolling Shermans off the assembly lines at a pace that sometimes exceeded 2,000 units per month. Quantity, it was hoped, would overcome quality, but for the men inside, quantity simply meant more potential coffins. Lieutenant Michael Mac Mackenzie, a Sherman platoon leader in the 1st Armored Division, summarized the prevailing mood in a letter home. "We feel like we're bringing knives to a gunfight. They see us coming and they just wait. It's not bravery they feel, it's pure contempt." The fundamental historical contradiction of the Italian campaign was this. The Allies possessed overwhelming air superiority, unlimited supplies, and seemingly endless numbers of tanks. Yet, strategically, they were paralyzed by a small number of superior German fighting vehicles. The war was turning into a costly stalemate, all because the Sherman's punch was too soft. But deep within the US Army Ordnance Department, engineers were finalizing a terrifying solution, one that defied the very laws of conventional shell design. They had ignored the shell's size and focused entirely on its speed. The Germans never saw the science coming. We are about to delve into the secret history of a weapon that changed the entire European land war. If you want to continue uncovering the forgotten technological secrets and human dramas of World War II, make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of the Steel Shock. The year is 1942. The setting is not the mud of Italy, but the pristine proving grounds of the Aberdeen Test Center in Maryland. Faced with reports of the fearsome new generation of German armor, American engineers were locked in a desperate race against physics. They knew they couldn't drastically redesign the Sherman tank or its turret overnight. The war needed tanks now. The solution, therefore, had to be in the ammunition. They turned their attention to a concept known as sub-caliber ammunition. The standard 75mm shell had to be heavy, with a large mass to carry the explosive filler. But armor penetration isn't about mass, it's about impact pressure. The breakthrough was the M61 armor-piercing capped ballistic-capped APCBC shell, which was the standard round. But the true game-changer was the M93 high-velocity armor-piercing HVAP round. This round, also known by the British term APCR, armor-piercing composite rigid, was a revolutionary piece of engineering that married light materials with pure speed. The shell casing was still 75mm wide to fit the gun, but the actual penetrating projectile, the penetrator, was radically smaller, a dense, hard core, about 37mm in diameter, made of tungsten carbide. This incredibly heavy, non-deforming metal was housed in a light alloy casing and fitted with a ballistic cap. When the gun fired, the tungsten core was accelerated to an unprecedented velocity. The result? The M93 HVAP round exited the 75mm M3 barrel not at 2,030 feet per second, but at a blistering 2,600 feet per second, 792 meters per second. That 30% increase in muzzle velocity translated into a massive jump in kinetic energy and, crucially, a concentration of that energy into the small, dense tungsten carbide core. The engineers had effectively turned the medium 75mm gun into a light, high-velocity cannon. They didn't change the tank, they changed the shell. From the outside, the Sherman looked exactly the same. The enemy had no visual cue, no new gun muzzle to fear. This subtlety was its greatest strategic asset. The Germans would continue to judge the book by its cover and pay the ultimate price for their misjudgment. Dr. Hermann Glass, one of the physicists on the project, later recalled the testing. When we saw the M93 core punch clean through a thick plate of German standard steel at 1,000 yards, a plate the standard shell barely scratched, we knew we had achieved a kind of battlefield alchemy. We had given the light tank the heart of a heavy one. The deployment was complicated by the scarcity of the core material, tungsten. This strategic metal was hard to source in the quantities needed. As a result, the M93 rounds were highly restricted. Each tank unit in the European theatre was initially issued only a handful of these precious shells, often 6 per tank, to be used only in dire tank-killing emergencies. They were the ultimate break glass in case of Tiger weapon. The sheer industrial output required to sustain this effort was immense. The US was not only manufacturing millions of standard shells, but also coordinating the global procurement of strategic metals for this specialized high-performance ammunition. It was the vast, unseen machinery of American war production working in secret to create a solution for the impossible Italian terrain. The first shipment of M93 HVAP rounds arrived in Naples in the early autumn of 1943. They were labeled discreetly and distributed with almost zero fanfare. The tankers, exhausted and demoralized by constant losses, were skeptical. They saw the same 75mm gun, the same thin armor, and the same Italian hills hiding the deadly German tanks. They were told this new shell was different, that it could do what no other round could. Soon, in the narrow, stone-walled valleys leading toward Cassino, the skepticism would be shattered, replaced by the deep, resonant shockwave of the truth. A handful of American tanks were about to face a German column head-on, in the worst possible scenario. And the Germans were about to learn that their contempt for the 75mm Sherman was catastrophically misplaced. December 1943. The Allies were inching toward the winter line. The engagement at San Pietro in Fine had become a vicious meat grinder. It was here, in the cold, misty hell of the Italian mountains, that the M93 HVAP rounds were first used in numbers sufficient to alter a local battle's outcome. The M4 Sherman, armed with the standard 75mm M3 gun, when firing the HVAP round, suddenly transcended its previous role. It became a new tactical entity. While not officially renamed by the Ordnance Department, in the field, among the German tank crews who were suddenly facing a devastating new threat from an old foe, a dark legend began to coalesce. They referred to this terrifyingly effective, seemingly transformed tank as the M13 killer, or simply the M13, a ghostly designation born of fear and confusion. A column of 4 Shermans, led by Sergeant Frank Duke Morrison, was ambushed outside a ruined village. Waiting for them was a platoon of German armored vehicles, including 2 Panther AUSAF. At tanks, the Panthers immediately opened fire. The first Sherman was engulfed in flame within seconds, the dreaded Ronson effect. Morrison's mind was racing. He ordered his gunner, Corporal Rivera, to load the new, heavily guarded ammunition. Rivera, M13, aim for the hull, center mass, and pray. The German commander, Hauptmann Klaus Richter, was watching the scene unfold from his Panther's cupola. He saw the flash of the Sherman's 75mm gun and braced himself for the usual useless glancing blow. Richter's own historical account, found in captured records, paints a picture of instant, unimaginable shock. The flash was the same, but the sound was different. A sharp, almost electrical crack, and then the explosion inside. I saw the flash penetrate the turret ring of our lead Panther. It wasn't a fire, it was a violent disintegration. It was like a steel needle had pierced a sheet of paper. We were hit again. My crew panicked. The Sherman, the tank we laughed at, had become an executioner. The HVAP core hit the Panther's massive sloped glacis plate at nearly 2,600 feet per second. Instead of shattering or deflecting, the tungsten penetrator transferred its concentrated energy, piercing the 80 millimeters of steel armor. It didn't stop there. Once inside, the projectile and the huge chunk of metal it displaced ricocheted violently, scattering white-hot tungsten shrapnel throughout the crew compartment, igniting ammunition and fuel. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. 2 Panthers and an accompanying Stu-G3 assault gun were destroyed by Morrison's 3 remaining Shermans. The German ambush had been turned into a massacre. The effect of this new, unseen threat rippled through the German ranks. The psychological advantage they had held, the comforting knowledge that distance meant safety, was instantly erased. The 75mm Sherman was suddenly capable of killing a Panther or a Tiger from 800 yards, a distance previously considered harmless. Soldiers began to report a terrifying sound, a sharper, higher-pitched crack from the Sherman guns. It was the distinct auditory signature of the HVAP round, the sound of a small, fast-moving killer. The confidence of the Axis armor evaporated, replaced by the acute, paralyzing fear that every single M4 Sherman they encountered could now be a dedicated tank killer. The war in Italy had just become vastly more complicated for the defenders. By early 1944, the undeniable impact of the HVAP round and the new respect, or rather, the raw, visceral terror afforded to the 75mm Sherman was cemented in the minds of every German tanker on the Italian front. But while this new technology was the great equalizer on the battlefield, the true unsung hero of this transformation was the relentless, overwhelming industrial scale that powered it. The German military was an engineering powerhouse. They built machines of formidable, uncompromising quality. Yet their production model was inherently complex, agonizingly slow, and fixated on producing exquisite heavy designs. The mighty Panther, while a magnificent weapon of war, required an average of 150,000 man-hours to roll just 1 unit off the assembly line. Compare that figure to the simplified assembly line-built M4 Sherman, which required roughly 6,000 man-hours per unit. This ratio of production was not just significant, it was a staggering structural disparity that determined the fate of the war. This massive industrial output disparity allowed the Allies not only to absorb the horrific, costly losses sustained in Italy, where the terrain favored the defender, but also to rapidly deploy specialized, small-batch solutions like the M93 ammunition. It was the vast American factory floor that gave physics a tactical advantage. The biggest limiting factor, the Achilles heel of the HVAP concept, remained the tungsten carbide core. Despite the best efforts of the Allied supply chain, the global supply of this critical metal was finite. This scarcity necessitated a careful and highly strategic allocation. Historical statistics paint a vivid picture of this constraint. Through the peak fighting in Italy, the average Sherman crew fired an estimated 2,500 high-explosive HE rounds for every single HVAP round issued. The HVAP was never meant to be a general-purpose shell. It was a rare surgical tool, a diamond scalpel in a box of steel hammers. This extreme scarcity placed an impossible burden of decision on the Sherman commander. Do I use this precious shell on a suspected Tiger, that might be camouflaged behind that barn risking a miss? Or do I save it for the absolute certainty of a head-on engagement where the odds are already stacked against me? This wasn't merely a tactical decision debated in the quiet of a field office. It was a life-or-death gamble, made in the smoking chaos of combat. Every commander had to become an expert in instantaneous threat assessment, mentally rationing and conserving their few silver bullets for the moments that truly defined survival. Yet those few rounds delivered an immense psychological lift. Sergeant Pete "Rocky" Balboa, a Sherman loader in the 3rd Armored Division, captured the feeling perfectly in a post-war interview. When we heard that shell go zing out of the barrel, that high-pitched crack, it was the best sound in the world. It didn't matter if we had 3 rounds or 30. Just knowing we could kill a tiger, that we weren't helpless anymore, gave us back our fighting edge. It was like we signed a new contract with the devil, and this time we were holding the pen. Across the lines, the German response was a frantic, technological scramble rooted in confusion. They intensified the thickness of their armor, resulting in variants like the formidable Panther Ausf. G, and they began applying the thick, gritty paste known as Zimmerit to their tanks. Zimmerit was an anti-magnetic paste designed to defeat magnetic anti-tank mines, an utterly useless defense against the pure kinetic penetrators of the HVAP round. But its application highlights the depth of their desperation and confusion. They simply didn't know what new, terrifying weapon was hitting them, so they prepared for every threat, even the wrong ones. The strategic irony was now complete. American ingenuity, driven by the principles of mass production and high-velocity physics, had successfully given the humble M4 Sherman a temporary but decisive tactical parity. The German industrial machine, focused on producing a few masterful examples of engineering, was now forced onto the defensive, psychologically crippled by a weapon they had never expected from a gun they had previously dismissed. The crucible of the Italian campaign became the ultimate proving ground for this paradigm shift, irrevocably demonstrating that the future of tank warfare belonged not just to heavy armor, but to the blinding speed of the projectile. By the spring of 1945, the Allied armies were sweeping through Europe. The brutal, unforgiving battle for Italy, though costly and drawn out, had served its ultimate purpose. It was the crucial, bloody technological testing ground where the M93 HVAP round elevated the M4 Sherman from a capable infantry support tank to an undeniably effective killer of Germany's heaviest armor. The psychological victory won by the HVAP round was perhaps more important and far-reaching than the physical one. The final brutal proof of its tactical value came during the fierce fighting in the flat, open terrain of the Po Valley. Here, multiple recorded engagements confirmed that a 75mm Sherman, often operating from concealed positions, could consistently disable or destroy even the formidable Tiger II, Königstiger, when firing the HVAP shell at close range, specifically under 500 meters, and targeting the vulnerable turret ring or side armor. The German doctrine of standoff superiority, the core belief that their tanks could destroy the enemy from distance before the enemy could effectively reply, was fundamentally and irrevocably rendered obsolete by a single, terrifying tungsten core. The HVAP round did not end the story of the Sherman. It paved the way for the next major evolution in its firepower. Its success led directly to the rapid deployment of the M4A3E8, or the famous Easy 8, armed with the much more capable 76mm M1 gun. This gun, specifically designed with a longer barrel and higher tolerances to handle even more advanced HVAP and later APDS, armor-piercing discarding sabot ammunition, permanently standardized the high-velocity doctrine for Allied armor. The 75mm HVAP was the essential bridge, a necessary stopgap, that allowed the Allies to survive the onslaught of the Panther and the Tiger long enough for the superior 76mm and later the heavy 90mm guns to take over the primary anti-tank role. The cost of this victory, however, was immense. The total number of Shermans built reached nearly 50,000 units, a staggering testament to unparalleled American industrial power, but also a stark, grim reminder of the overwhelming number of tanks necessary to simply absorb losses and overwhelm a determined, technically superior enemy. For every Sherman crew that survived the war, countless others perished due to the M4's thin armor and explosive potential. The HVAP rounds gave them a fighting chance, a brief window of parity, but it could never erase the inherent design limitations of the vehicle itself. Post-war military analysis from the surviving German command consistently cited the unexpected lethality of the standard Allied tanks in the later stages of the war. They had accounted for the handful of specialized, heavily armored Allied vehicles like the British Firefly, but they had fatally underestimated, had not factored in, the power of targeted, highly advanced ammunition deployed en masse across the entire American armored fleet. The M93 was the quintessential example of American ingenuity, a quick, powerful fix to a monumental problem implemented across an impossibly large scale. The Sherman, the tank that was initially ridiculed as a death trap by its own crews and arrogantly scorned by its enemies, had transformed its very identity. It did not defeat the German war machine alone, but it neutralized its primary tactical advantage. The M4, armed with its silver bullet of tungsten, forced the German tankers to fight on Allied terms. At close range, in overwhelming numbers, and with the terrifying realization that the Ronson could now bite back, hard, with a blinding flash of high-velocity doom. The story of the M93 HVAP round is a testament to the core truth that in war, a single, brilliant innovation, a secret core of metal, fired at impossible speed, can overturn the most ingrained tactical certainties. The Shermans of Italy, armed with their few precious rounds, delivered a steel shock that reverberated all the way to Berlin, proving decisively that the true heart of a war machine is often found not in the thickness of its armor, but in the devastating precision and velocity of its projectile. The history of the Second World War is full of these hidden technical battles and incredible human stories. If you want to continue exploring the technological secrets and untold adventures of this global conflict, make sure you like this video, share it with a fellow history enthusiast, and click the subscribe button for more documentaries on military strategy and technology. Thank you for watching The Steel Shock.